everyone for watching today. Today is going to be all about why you should move to Vault Professional from Vault Basic, or I guess if you're not using Vault at all, then some things you could get by using Vault Professional. So if you're already using Vault Professional and making good use of its features, you may not see a lot of new information today. It might be a bit redundant. But I guess if you are already using Vault Pro and you're not using it to its full capability, then you might actually learn some things too. This will be a largely, I guess, feature-focused presentation, mostly because that's really why you would choose to upgrade from Vault Basic to Vault Pro, or to implement Vault Professional instead of Vault Basic, would be because of what it can do for you, right? So we'll be talking quite a bit about the features, but also why they matter and why they would be important to you. So that's the agenda for today. And then a bit at the end, some more about why, not just the features, but why. And also just to maybe assuage some fears about Vault Pro. I talk to a lot of companies that are looking to implement some sort of data management solution, and the sense I get is they're often a bit overwhelmed about what Vault Professional can provide and what it can do. And it seems like a lot of people want to start out with Basic because it's simple, and they're a bit afraid of taking on the complexity of something like Vault Professional. And then the shame is they often never get to the point, like if they had planned to go from Basic to Pro, they never quite get there for whatever reason. And so I want to try to just comment a bit about why I think it's not such a big deal to use Pro versus Basic in terms of complexity. We'll get into that a bit later. And then also just a bit about how Vault Pro can help you prepare for the future, even if you're not ready for, all of the functionality, you're not ready to take advantage of some of the very advanced things that Vault Pro can provide. The sooner you get into the habit of using Vault Pro and populating it with important data, the better position you'll be for the future in terms of business software integration. So let's talk now about Vault Pro and kind of what it can do, and a little bit of compare and contrast between Vault Pro and Vault Basic. So just to level set a little bit, because this is largely a comparison between Autodesk's Vault Basic product and Vault Professional. Vault Basic is an application. It is included with some of Autodesk's design software. A lot of people say Vault Basic is free. That's not true. You pay for Vault Basic. You just pay for it as part of your CAD software subscription. Certain types of CAD software, like Inventor or AutoCAD with tool sets, for example, and a few others maybe, but most of it now is incorporated all into like AutoCAD with tool sets and Inventor. But Vault Basic is included with those. And in order to use Vault Basic, you must have a CAD license assigned to you through your Autodesk ID. So you absolutely are paying for Vault Basic. If you're not using any sort of data management solution right now, and you're using Inventor or AutoCAD with tool sets like AutoCAD, full AutoCAD, or AutoCAD mechanical, or AutoCAD electrical, if you're not using Vault Basic right now and you're having, data management issues, at the very least, you should be investigating Vault Basic to help with those. It can be a tremendous help in managing your CAD data. So Vault Basic, again, you pay for it. It comes with your CAD subscription automatically. Vault Professional is an additional expense per user. But that additional expense comes with a lot of additional functionality, which in every case that I've seen more than pays for itself, right? As long as it's properly implemented. So that's what we're talking about here. Should we use the version of Vault that comes with our CAD software, no additional software expense, or should we pay extra to get more, right? What more would we get, and is it worth us investing? Right. And I would argue for almost every company that I've ever talked to, it's worth it. Vault Pro is worth it. So a big component of Vault Pro is expanding what you can manage and how you manage it. Vault Pro, rather than managing, say, just Inventor data and just AutoCAD data, while it's true you can manage any file type with Vault Basic, with Vault Pro, anyone can use it as long as they have a license. And there's a companion license type called Vault Office that non-CAD users can use that's much less expensive than a full Vault Pro license. And so it's much more feasible to manage everything related to the design of a given product, because you can more easily manage, say, Office documents that non-CAD users need to interact with or even author. But also managing the process. Vault Basic is a work in progress solution, and we'll see an example of this in just a minute. It really is designed to just manage the CAD files. The latest version is the latest version, and yes, you have some history there, but it's largely just there for reference, and hard to interpret. Vault Professional really more is about managing process and the entire design. And that includes, say, more efficient release management, revision management, sharing of data, right? It's just much easier to get, everyone involved in the process. With Vault Pro, you have better management of concurrent design workflows because, again, you can control the status of files and who has access to files at certain times. You have much better security with Vault Pro. And so the fundamental management of the data, I think, is easier and more effective with Vault Professional because you have better tools to execute that management. And one of the biggest tools to help manage both collaboration and the overall process is the concept of revision control. So you can think of this as milestones, I suppose, where as a document changes over time, you can keep track of where it is in that process, right? Are we working on it? Are we reviewing it? Is it released? Is it now under revision again? And make it easier to interpret that history, right? So you can look back and say, when did we go into design review on this? How long has this been under review? Or when did we release revision B? Which file was Rev B? The ability to capture that information. And that's really where the difference between Pro and Basic is most visible, I would say, from a file management standpoint, is this concept of revision. So Vault Basic tracks what we call versions. And so I have up here on the screen now a view of Vault Basic. This is Vault Basic 2023. And we're looking at an assembly that has undergone some change. And if you're using Vault Basic today, or if you've looked at it before, this probably looks at least somewhat familiar. So I could see I have an Inventor assembly here, and I have 6 versions of this assembly. So it has changed over time. And sometimes we got a comment as to why a new version was created, and sometimes we didn't. And we can see a couple of comments are handy and say, oh, this was when Rev A was released, and this was when Rev B was released. And so if someone comes to us and says, hey, we've got a customer, they've got a problem, ERP says we sold them Rev A, can you take a look at this? It's like, okay, well, I can go and find the Inventor assembly, but now I have to go back through the history, and hopefully I do have a comment. Well, what if they bought Rev C? Which one of these is Rev C? We can guess, and maybe version 6 is Rev C. That's the only one that's newer than the one that says Rev B. But it really is technically always a guess. In addition, it's very easy to accidentally get things tagged incorrectly if you're trying to use comments to manage things or properties. So if I look at this, I can see Rev B released on this part as well? And is like that really Rev B of that part, or did I just accidentally get the same comment when I checked out? Vault Basic is kind of like the Wild West when it comes to um, managing things like revision and history. You really can't count on the history of a record in Vault Basic for any level of accuracy unless you have an incredibly disciplined group of users. And we have a lot of great customers, but I've never met any group of people that were so disciplined that there was never a problem going back to history and finding something very specific, right? Someone's always going to make a mistake somewhere, even if they just forget once. Well, now you have to go through a bunch of hoops to get the file checked out, to get it checked back in with a particular comment, etc. You know, compare that to Vault Professional. So this is Vault Professional now. And one thing you'll notice, I've got dark mode on in Vault Pro. That's an option in Vault Pro, not Vault Basic. That for some people, dark mode might be enough to upgrade. But if we take a look at, you know, essentially the same assembly over here in Vault Professional, I can take a look at its history, and I can see something a little bit different. So I have 9 versions of this one. Notice I still have versions. Well, actually, it looks like we've skipped some versions. Those versions are actually still here. So much like Vault Basic, I still have versions 1 through 9 in this case, but I have a lot more information about these things. So first off, I have what's called a state, right? I can see, well, version 2 of this was a work in progress, and version 3 was released as revision A. This is a property controlled by the system. Then we went back to work in progress, which became Rev B. We made an edit, and then we released Rev B, and then so on with Rev C. So we have this entire history available to us, but because in Vault Pro, we're able to keep track of revisions, right? We have more control over things. A version in Vault is created anytime the record changes for any reason. You check in changes to the file, you change properties. In Vault Pro, a revision is created when you choose to revise it by changing its revision level or by changing its status and having the revision level automatically increment, right? So revision control is a key component of Vault Professional, to the point where I can even filter out all of these intermediate, say, work in progress versions and say, I just want to look at this thing's revision history. So now here was release Rev A, B, and C. And if I ever need to go back in time and get specifically a revision, I can ask Vault, give me specifically what we released as Rev B. And then every file, whatever revision was used by Rev B, will come out with it. So there's no question about, you know, what I'm looking at. Customer bought Rev B, we need to troubleshoot a problem. I can tell Vault, give me Rev B, and I'll be looking at what we released as Rev B without any question. So in terms of file management, to me, that is by far the most important difference between Vault Basic and Vault Professional. And most of our customers that use Vault Professional do use revision control in some form, be it on the files or on items or part numbers, which we'll talk about in a minute, right? But revision control is something that if you make something that changes over time and you need to keep track of those changes, it's extremely difficult to do it without revision control. And Vault Pro can give you that control. Now, along with that basic idea of we need to control revision and status of things, that implies you need a lot of other behaviors that can really both aid that, but also a lot of ancillary benefits, right? So preventing unwanted changes. One of the biggest problems in Vault Basic is that your access is vault-wide, and it's the same regardless of where a file might be at in its life cycle. So if I can edit files in Vault Basic, I can check this file out whenever I want, as long as no one else has it checked out. Doesn't matter if we've released it for manufacturer and me accidentally checking it out and accidentally making a change and checking it back in would cause a problem. In Vault Basic, there's no way to prevent that. The only way, sort of, I've seen other people do is they'll create a special user called released or something, and then they'll check the files out to the released user, right, to prevent other people from accidentally checking it out. But that's a whole set of hoops you got to jump through, and it still causes problems. In Vault Pro, when something is released, it's locked, right? So again, with Vault Professional, something goes into a release state, it's locked, then regardless of who it is, who's trying to access it, depending on whether or not they have access in that state, they can't check it out to make changes. So that access control is extremely important. Automating the approval process, again, is a big component of that. The concept of statuses, where something can be in a work state or a released state or a view state, and moving the files through those states, giving permission to individuals to do those things, making sure that revision levels automatically increment. All of that is possible with Vault Professional. Compliance is a big one. The fact that you have a process, that you can go back in time, that you can keep track of who did what and when and control access to those things. Vault Pro can provide that. And then sort of a side benefit of this, behavior, being able to kick off other automated processes. Say when we take a file from work to released, we want to automatically make a PDF, for example. We can do that out of the box with Vault Professional. We can make PDFs or DWF files just by virtue of taking a file and adjusting its lifecycle state from work in progress to released, for example. We can put a job into a job queue that will then queue up synchronizing properties to make sure the file is up to date, and then creating a PDF. But again, because we're taking some sort of action and saying we are done with this file for now, we're ready to release it, you could take advantage of Vault's API and through some very inexpensive third-party products like the Cool Orange products to automatically create other things like step files or DXF files. Right? And again, Vault Basic accesses vault-wide and persistent. Vault Professional, not only can we provide access based on the status of the file, say it's locked when it's released, it's editable by these people when it's a work in progress, maybe it can't even be seen by certain people when it's a work in progress. Vault Pro gives you that access at the status level, but also even at individual records. I could say this particular file can only be seen by these people, or this folder can only be seen by these people, or these other people, they can see that the file exists, but they can't download a copy of it. Vault Pro has that level of granularity in security. And on that note, we do have a question I'd like to address here as we go. Does the lock state also copy over during a copy design? That's a great question. Copy design is an incredible tool. It is the reason some people use Vault Basic, period, just to get copy design. If you're used to copy design in Vault Basic, right, so if I was going to copy this, I think I've got a file checked out. Oh, I set this vault up yesterday and I didn't quite configure it properly. But But copy design in Vault Basic is great. It lets you, if you're not familiar with the concept of copy design, you can take an existing Inventor assembly or AutoCAD drawings, make copies of certain things, and the Vault will automatically make copies of those files, rename them, repair relationships, and check those back into Vault for you. All right, so this is copy design in Vault Basic. It is very functional, but very basic. Vault Professional's copy design is much more capable. The interface is different. It's a little busier, but ultimately it's much more capable. But the question was, does the lock state copy over when you do a copy design? The answer to that is technically it depends, but generally no. So what determines whether something is locked is the status that the file has. So right now, my assembly here is released. If I make a copy of something here and get a new copy of this assembly, when it goes back into the Vault, its default state or status is going to be work in progress. And in the work in progress state, it's unlocked. So while my source file is locked, like you see here, my copy is going to be a new file going into the Vault, and it's going to start out unlocked. So this is a fantastic way. If you do a lot of copy design, if you have a lot of, say, standard assemblies that you want to make sure do not change, but then you base new designs off of them, get your standard assembly squared away, everything's good. You lock it, right, by releasing it, let's say, and you can make copies from that all day long, with never a chance of accidentally modifying one of the files that didn't get copied. But any of the new files that got copied will start out work in progress. You make your changes and you're done. So Vault Pro, between its better copy design, the fact that you can lock files, the fact that Vault Pro can give you part numbers, right? If I say I want to need a copy of this file and a copy of this file, I got to come up with a name for these things. Well, I can tell Vault, just actually, I don't want to give these things a name. Just give them a number for me. Vault Pro can just give these files a new number, so you don't have to think about what the name happens to be. So if, depending on how you work and how you get part numbers in your environment, Vault Pro could actually give you new part numbers that eventually, go into your ERP or MRP system and are completely valid, right? So access control, this idea of revision control, this is really the big ticket item, I would say, with Vault Pro in my mind. Now, that said, there are a lot of other things Vault Pro enables that I think have even a higher value proposition. If we're talking about, is Vault Pro going to pay for itself? Because as nice as the status and locking is, this is still all within engineering and the CAD users. This is just housekeeping. It's helping the CAD users keep track of their files, which can certainly pay for itself. I mean, it doesn't take but one piece of metal cut wrong due to an out-of-date file to maybe pay for your entire Vault Pro subscription for a year, depending on the number of users you have, right? So certainly keeping better track of revisions can certainly pay for itself with Vault Pro. But some of the other features is really where you can start to make management happy and make them more willing to get you the tools that you need if you need something like Vault Pro to manage your engineering data. So I would say the most important one of those these days, especially that is becoming more important daily as we talk to our customers, is the ability to manage bills of material. It seems like just about every day lately, we talk with a customer that needs to get a better handle on their bill of materials process. And in fact, next month, I'll be doing a webcast on this very subject, the concept of bills of material and how you can improve the process of getting your bill of materials from engineering through the rest of the org. Vault Pro can be a very important part of that process, which we'll get into in just a second. Okay. Beyond that bill of materials management, managing the change process itself, right? This concept of statuses and states, they are what I would call housekeeping. They are just keeping track of the fact that a file has changed. The who and the why is largely not captured unless you're, very consistent with comments. Who was involved in the change, and why, and who said it was okay, who requested it. This mechanism in Vault Pro is not really designed for that. We do have a mechanism for that called a change order. And it is that mechanism can really help facilitate the change process itself if you don't already have some process in your environment that helps with that. And then what is really probably the simplest part of Vault Pro, but is probably also the most used, is view access. So if you remember earlier on, I talked about how with Vault Basic, in order to access Vault Basic, you must have a CAD license assigned to an Autodesk ID that you use. Basically, you have to be a CAD user. What that means is with Vault Basic, if I am checking, if I want to get access to a file in Vault Basic, I've got to have CAD. If I just need to go and look at a drawing and I'm not a CAD user, I can't get into Vault Basic. Now, that can be good or bad. I would argue that it is almost always good, because if I'm working on a drawing, I don't want anyone to see my changes until I'm ready for them to see it. I don't want someone to go and grab a drawing off the network that maybe I'm currently editing and have them think it's good and then go cut metal against it, right? And usually there are processes in place to keep that from happening, but not always. And so if someone is free to always just go to a network drive and get a drawing and make from it, if I'm working on that drawing, it's going to end up wrong, right? So I would argue even with Vault Basic, it's a good thing that people just can't go look at your files. With Vault Professional, however, anyone with access, with a license or access to what we call the thin client, can get in and look at the files. The reason it's okay in Vault Pro and not Vault Basic, again, gets back to the concept of status and access control. I can control when people see my changes in Vault Professional through the status of the file or the status of the part number. I can say, this is now released. I'm ready for someone to see this file or to see the changes that I'm working on. So Vault Professional gives you the tools you need to make sure that people see the right thing at the right time. And so you can give them direct access. Vault Basic doesn't have those tools, and so it's dangerous for people to get in and look at Vault Basic, because they could be looking at something that's work in progress and they would have generally no way of knowing. And then just a few more things about Vault Pro at maybe sort of a higher level. Vault Professional has an extensive API, and it's a server that's essentially always up and listening. What that means is it's easier to integrate with other business systems. Again, this is something we'll be talking about more next month, and we talk about with our customers every day now, is the idea that we need to get a bill of materials that is generated and specified by engineering, at least the engineering components of the BOM, what we call the engineering BOM. We need to get that BOM into our ERP system, our MRP system, our PLM system, whatever you use to manage your bills of material enterprise-wide. We need to get that into that other business system more efficiently. Vault Pro gives you the tools to do that. Vault Basic doesn't. And while say Inventor and AutoCAD both have APIs that you could use to do some sort of integration, it's generally a lot harder to talk to the CAD file to get data out of it, especially depending on the application, than it is to talk to Vault and get information from Vault, as long as it's configured properly. So the ability to integrate because of its API is very powerful, but also scalability. So Vault Basic, you can hold a lot of data. You can hold hundreds of thousands of files. It's not a problem. Where it becomes a problem is if you've got people working remotely, if you've got multiple locations, especially locations scattered across the globe. If you're trying to back up your Vault data and your Vault is gigantic, Vault Pro gives you the tools to manage that much better, right? You can replicate data to other locations in a couple different ways. You can do incremental backups with Vault Professional. It's more scalable because of that. And there's a relatively new feature in Vault Professional called Vault Gateway that works extremely well, that can give access to people outside of your firewall to your Vault. So Vault itself, the Vault server application, it is not designed to be exposed to the internet. If you're working from home, if you've got contractors, if your server's in the cloud, you need a firewall between the Vault server and the internet. Vault Gateway is a way to open up your Vault safely to the internet without a VPN. And I won't go into too many details about how that works now. Essentially, there's a middleman server that Autodesk will provide to you that takes requests from people on the internet and then safely passes them to your Vault server and then answers back, right? And this has enabled some of our customers already to work with contractors around the globe where they're concerned about giving general access to their network via VPN. They can give them very limited access only to their Vault server through the gateway. It's a fantastic way to give access to people. So I want to highlight a couple more features of Vault Professional. The change management, just a little bit about what it can do. And just, I want to apologize. I've been keeping an eye on the audience view here in GoToWebinar, and I can't tell, I don't know if my view is accurate or not, but it looks like it's not keeping up well at all with my screen sharing. It looks like it's maybe 3 or 4 slides behind, which is something I'm not typically ever seen with GoToWebinar. So you may not be seeing my screen as I demonstrate things. If you don't see something I'm pointing to on the screen, it may be because the presentation's not keeping up. But the concept of change orders, engineering change orders. So again, the concept here is we need to make a change. Someone needs to request a change somehow. We need to say evaluate that request. Should we execute that change or not? If so, we execute the work against it. Then that work needs to be checked, and then the change itself needs to be approved, and then we finally make the change effective. So that whole concept, that basic idea of someone sees a need for a change, the change request is evaluated, executed, and then made effective. We can manage that process in Vault Professional. Now, the overall workflow of the change order is fixed. The basic ideas, the basic steps are the same every time. in the change order. So generally, in my mind, that works best, say, within engineering. Right. So this whole status here that we see works best in my mind within engineering. That's kind of what it's designed for. If you need more enterprise-wide change management, you generally need a little more flexibility than this, and that's where, say, Fusion 360 Manage would come into play. Autodesk's Fusion 360 Manage, because it has a lot more flexibility and capability when it comes to workflow. But this is very handy. When it comes to within engineering, again, this concept of requesting a change, evaluating the request, etc. So while you've got this overall flow, you would link this change, and this change would become effective against whatever records are associated with it. So you can see I have a change order here. And on this change order, we have linked to it this part. So a question just came in, how is the change order linked to a specific assembly part, et cetera? You actually indicate on the change order what it's linked to, right? So if I was going to create a new change order, for example, right, what you can see here is, you can fill out things like title, description, et cetera. I can add records to this. So I could come in here and use my, general Vault behavior. So if we needed to modify that printer assembly, for example, I think it was this guy here. So I can add that assembly, and maybe we know it's like these 3 parts as well, right? These are the files that are now controlled by this change order. I can add additional reference information, but I can also execute markups here right within the canvas. Now, in this case, it looks like I maybe don't have a DWF of this. Let me just see if I can get that updated here. So give that just a second. But I can actually do markups of this file right inside Vault. This is the relatively new addition, I think in the 2023 release, the ability to do markups within here and save those markups into the system. This uses the Autodesk Large Model Viewer. Right, so I have, in this case, a 3D view. If there was a drawing, I'd have the 2D view as well. But I can actually create a markup, whatever I need to do, here's the problem, right? All the markup tools we have, callouts, text, geometry, etc. And I can save this back to the list over here. So if you looked at Vault Professional in the past, you might have noticed it could have been a little bit clunky, I would say, in terms of the markup and viewing, because it used design review, and it required hooking into like a legacy type application, hooking into this, and it didn't always work well depending on your environment. The markup and viewing capability inside Vault Professional these days is just fantastic, I think. Notice too, with this markup, I can provide a comment, and that comment could even go via email, depending on how my system's configured. So if someone was waiting for me to indicate where the problem was and provide more information, they can now get an email saying that's been done, and that is over here. So anyone now looking at this file could come back and look at this history and get to this markup straight away. Right? So the change order is a collaboration tool. We're marking the files that it controls, but then through what we would call the routing, we can choose who is responsible. So for example, we can say if it's a documentation update, Eddie's the responsible engineer. He's the one doing the work. Rick is an approver. Our ECO doc manager is an approver, right? So this is, while the workflow doesn't change, the participants do, depending on the change. So you can specify specific documents that participate in the change and individuals. So you can say, it's not just this group of people that could do it, it's this person. And generally, if you ask a whole group of people to do something, it tends to not get done because everyone sort of waits for somebody else to do it sometimes. If you say this person's got to do it, well, now it's on their list and they'll knock it out. And you can see over here on the left, my work list, where all of the change orders that I have some responsibility for appear. So the change order is a great way if you don't already have some digital process managing your change, or at least managing that change within engineering, to get things under control. Because even if you have some enterprise-wide change process that's managed by your ERP system, usually there's a box somewhere in that process that says change engineering documentation. Within that little box in your ERP system's change process is where this engineering process could live, and that can be very effective. So we talked about the concept of revision control, change management. Let's get on to what I think is becoming a more and more important aspect of managing engineering data, and that is managing bills of material. So that's something that Vault Professional can help with as well. So these assemblies have bills of material. If I open up, this printer assembly, we can take a look at its bill of materials, but that bill of materials right now, at least, what I have on the screen, it lives inside Inventor, this Inventor document. And in order to get to that bill of materials, I have to open up the Inventor file, meaning I have to have something that can interpret Inventor data, and then I can get in and look at its bill of materials. Right? And I can view that in a few different ways. But I only have access to what was specified in Inventor. And usually that means I can see what we've drawn, what we've modeled. Now you can certainly add components to an Inventor bill of materials that you don't draw. It's called virtual components. But there are some difficulties with that. You end up retyping data a lot of times, or in my mind, worse, you end up with like empty part files or empty assembly files to represent things that you don't draw, which is just another document you've got to manage, right? But again, I've got to have the Inventor data to interpret this. Now, I could certainly put a parts list on a drawing, right? But the drawing parts list is just some static thing. It lives on a drawing, and about the worst way you can deal with a bill of materials is to put a parts list on a drawing and then expect someone to just look at that drawing and say retype that bill of materials or that parts list into like an ERP system, right? I mean, you don't want to do that at all, because you're going to end up with problems, right? So a better approach in my mind is to use something like Vault Professional, because with Vault Professional, what we can do is we can actually extract that bill of materials, right? So if I looked for a printer, for example, so I've got, in this case, a part number. This is the part number for my printer, and mostly that same bill of materials that I had in Inventor, I have now here in Vault as well. But this BOM is a little bit different, because whereas in Inventor, I just had all of the components that I drew in Inventor, we've got some electrical design here as well, right? We often don't do that in Inventor. We have, the cable and harness module, but usually, something like AutoCAD Electrical would drive the BOM for the electrical part of it. And maybe part of it is done by another subsidiary of our company, and they use SolidWorks. What I can do with Vault is I can start with that Inventor bill of materials, right? This part number here and everything on the list, but I could add to it a subassembly that came from SolidWorks, and I can do that inside the Vault. And I can take an AutoCAD Electrical bill of materials that we see down here, So this was an AutoCAD electrical design. And we see down here, and I can combine all of that in Vault Professional so that I now have a unified engineering bill of materials, right? Even to the point where I can add components to the bill of materials within the vault itself, right? Notice I added Loctite and paint down here. These weren't drawn anywhere. You don't draw Loctite, right? But I can add them once I'm in Vault, right? So let's say if this was a subassembly, I need to add a component to it. I can open up this bill of materials, which is directly linked back to the CAD files, right? This is an AutoCAD electrical bill of materials. I can modify this bill of materials and add components to it, right? So I just search for Loctite. I've already got the part number in my system, and now it's on my BOM. So again, the goal here is to get to a complete engineering bill of materials. So you're not sitting in Excel, copying and pasting from other BOMs. You got to dig up a BOM that you did last week, and then because you don't remember the part number or you don't want to retype it in and make a mistake. So now you've got 4 or 5 spreadsheets open, and you're playing, Dr. Frankenstein, putting together all the bits of the other BOMs to get to something complete, and hopefully you didn't get the quantity wrong. You extract the BOM from your CAD file. The part of the BOM that came from CAD is still owned by CAD, so that when I make a change in Inventor, the BOM changes, it updates the BOM in Vault, but anything I added while I was in Vault is controlled by Vault. Then I get to that complete engineering BOM, and then I can either, export this bill of materials to an Excel file if we share BOMs that way, or Vault Pro gives me the tools that I need to more easily transfer that BOM automatically to some other business system, which again, we're going to get a lot more into BOMs in an upcoming webcast next month. Right. So a couple more questions about BOMs came in. Can BOM structure be a column in Vault Pro? That's a great question. If you mean structure, like is something phantom, referenced, inseparable? I don't know that structure can, because structure is inherent, and that's how Vault Pro interprets the bill of materials. So for example, if I have in the Inventor assembly, if I have a structure that's specified as inseparable, for example, or phantom would be even better. The bill of materials in Vault will not show the phantom component. It will automatically promote those children that were within the phantom to the phantom's level. So I don't know that BOM structure is something you can actively look at. Maybe you can, especially because of something like purchased. Ultimately, if you may be able to reference, if it's a property in Inventor, you can probably extract it. That's something that I have to look into. I mean, I don't know that it's a default property. I don't see it as a default property, but that's something I can look into and get back to you. And another question, can the BOM be exported to anything? Well, we can certainly take a bill of materials and export it from Vault, and we can export it by default to a few different formats: comma delimited, which can then be opened by Excel, tab delimited, DWF, which I've never seen anyone use, and then technically XML, which I've never really seen anyone use that regularly either. Comma delimited is usually the most common. And then if you're talking about structure, you have parent-child relationships. And in that case, you can describe it either as level numbers or parent item. But then ultimately, when you spit out the bill of materials, you can then choose the column order. So if your ERP or MRP system can import a CSV file, as long as the structure is described the right way, and then you've got the right columns in the right order, there's a really good chance that you could just use Vault Pro to organize that export and then spit it out, right? And then what you end up with is, if I just open this up in Excel, looks something like this, right? So the part number, its parent, and then right now like quantity, description, etc. Right? But again, any property you have associated with this part number in Vault can be exported as part of this. Right, and there's one last thing I'm going to talk about. We're getting close to the top of the hour here. This is often the most, like I said, the most commonly used aspect of Vault Professional, and it's what's called the thin client. So with Vault Basic, like I said, for better or worse, I think for better, non-CAD users cannot get into Vault Basic. Vault Professional gives you the tools to provide safe access to non-CAD users. They don't have to interpret things. You can make sure they only see what they're supposed to see. So what we're seeing here is the Vault Thin Client. This is a browser-based way of accessing Vault Professional. The best part about this is that it doesn't require a license. So if you have Vault Pro, if you have Vault Pro licenses in your environment, and you have people using Vault Pro, anyone in your company inside your firewall, again, it's not designed to be exposed to the internet, can access Vault Professional via this thin client. So they can search for files, they can search for part numbers, right? So if I instead wanted to search, say, for a bill of materials, right, here's part number 1002, I can see just about all of the information through my Vault Thick client. I can see that here. Including any of the related files. And I can view that file right here inside the web browser. I don't need to download any files, right? And it's, again, this Autodesk Large Model Viewer, which is a fantastic viewing experience. I can cut sections, I can do exploded views, I can even do markups here. Now, I cannot save this data directly back to Vault through the thin client. I could save it as, say, an image and attach it to an email. If I'm just a thin client user, to modify any data in Vault, you really need a license, and there's no license associated with this, right? But this is a much better way to communicate, say, back to engineering, something I'm having a problem with, or if I need to investigate, because the assembly drawing isn't clear how something goes together, well, I can just call up the thin client, explode, and really dig in here and see how all this really fits together. And there's no special effort required on engineering's part to do this. It just sort of automatically does it, right? As long as the DWF exists. Right. And you can control access, you can say only see the latest rev, you can see all revs, etc. So the thin client, there's not a lot to see about it, right? You can search for things, you can browse through the structure, you can review bills of material. But ultimately, it's a great way to get access to data in the Vault for your non-CAD users. Right. So we've kind of been through all of this. So let's talk a little bit now about using Vault to prepare for the future, right? And easing into Vault Pro, right? So system integration is becoming a more and more important part of engineering data management, taking data from engineering and getting it more easily and more reliably into other business systems. Part of that is because we just have less staff generally these days. It's hard to find people. We don't have time for someone to sit around and type bills of material in or spend 3 hours working on a BOM, which should just happen because the CAD software we're using would provide that capability, right? We can't afford mistakes, long lead times. You get a part number wrong, you wait 3 months for a part from a vendor only to find out you ordered the wrong thing, and now you're 3 months behind, right? And so getting this data right the first time and getting it transferred into another business system can be critical. And Vault Pro, with this bill of materials capability, puts you in a great position to do that. And again, if you're interested in this concept of bills of material and transfer to other business systems, make sure to sign up for our webcast next month. We'll be going into a lot of detail on that. So system integration is one. The other is changing workforce, people working from home, maybe working remotely entirely. Mergers and acquisitions, you acquire a company, on the other side of the country. Everyone needs good access to the data so they can work productively. Vault Professional has the tools to enable that. Replicating data for performance reasons. Vault Gateway to make it easy for that first 6-month period where you're still getting the IT stuff sorted out and where you may or may not have a great connection between the sites and VPN is weird and wonky and overloaded. Vault Gateway can make sure people can get into the vault and work productively regardless of the network situation between, say, the 2 or 4 or 10 facilities. Right. And finally, I want to end on Vault Pro and why it's easier than you might think to use it or to upgrade. All right. So if you're already using Vault Basic, in my mind, if you're using Vault Basic and you're comfortable with Vault Basic, you've already done the hard part. You've gotten your data loaded. You've gotten used to checking in and checking out and managing the data. That to me is the hard part. It is a very small incremental step to go to Pro, be it on the software side, where upgrading a server from basic to pro is really the same effort as just migrating from year to year. It's very straightforward, and we can help you with that. We help most of our customers with that. On the client side, you just install Vault Pro instead of Vault Basic, and yeah, it looks a little different, right? Vault Basic looks like this. You don't have dark mode, unfortunately, but this is Vault Basic, right? And this is Vault Pro. It's 90% the same. And if you're not using some of these things like change orders, for example, you just take it off the list and you don't see it anymore, right? So, Vault Basic and Vault Pro, except for a couple of different icons, you can certainly start out with Pro and use Pro just like you use Basic for a little bit while you're getting, everything sorted out in terms of how you want to use Pro, right? Modifying the configuration of Vault Pro is very easy. It comes with default configurations that fit a lot of manufacturing environments already. And we have literally decades of experience on staff here at Hagerman to help you with that, right? You can get Pro into use in days, not weeks. It's a very capable data management system that's very easy to implement and very easy to use. And again, if you're using Vault Basic today and you're finding it lacking, it is a very small incremental step to go to Pro that we can certainly help you with. Okay, so we've had a few more questions come in over the course of the presentation. Let me go ahead and get to those now. So there was a question I sort of tangentially addressed. Can the BOM for Vault be exported to anything? Yeah, you can export it to CSV. With other third-party tools like Cool Orange Power Jobs or PowerGate, you can do a lot more integration with BOM in the Vault. Another question, we have a ton of files in Vault that are not set to purchased that should be set to purchased BOM structure. I don't know that Vault can help you with that. It certainly wouldn't be to where you could say, extract the BOM, set that to purchased, and then have it feed back to purchased in Inventor. That's something you would have to do in Inventor. If you've got a lot of files like that, we might be able to help you with that from an automation perspective. Just get all the files out and run some script or some routine in Inventor to help you get that set up. So we can certainly talk to your Hagerman account manager and we'll have someone follow up to see how we could help with that. Another question, can the thin client allow users to download an IPT or an IAM? That's a great question. The answer is yes. That is something that is somewhat configurable. At least it used to be. I think these days maybe not. But yeah, I can download. If there's a DWF file that exists, I can download that. Otherwise, I can download the native file. Now, this is not designed to allow you to easily download, say, an entire Inventor assembly. You really need to something like Vault Office or Vault Pro itself to download an entire Inventor assembly. The thin client is for downloading one file at a time. Ideally for like the question for like a CAM user. I need to do something with this part. I want to download it. So I just click the ellipses, download file, and I've got a copy of it now in my downloads folder. By the way, if you want to prevent that, there's a permission in Vault to prevent download. So you could say they can see this file that it exists, but they can't get a copy of it. So if you want to prevent proliferation of files around, you can prevent that. Okay, so another question here, garbage in, garbage out. Do you recommend having an individual or an administrator or even a team of people to set this up properly and then maintain or police it? That's a great question. So if Vault is set up properly, in my mind, it doesn't take a lot of management as long as you're using something like Vault Pro. So a related question from the same person, our existing Vault Basic is a mess. Simply migrating the data from Basic to Professional would not be a recommended course of action. So Hagerman can certainly help you with that. If you're using Vault Basic and you feel like your Vault Basic is a mess, which it often can be because it lacks the controls that Vault Pro provides, there are lots of ways we can help you get that data under control. And I would say when you have a properly configured Vault Professional environment, it is much easier to keep it from getting to the point where it's a mess, and you don't need police. Because you can control who has access and when. You can more easily purge, which there was another question about that. What would happen if IT were to wipe versions in Vault? Is there a way to block versions from being cleared out by IT? The best way to prevent data from getting wiped out is using Vault Pro with its life cycles, because you can tag certain states and say anything that's in a release state can never be purged, for example. Or you can purge the stuff that's work in progress, excuse me, but not the design review and the released stuff. So if you're having issues with IT purging stuff you need to keep, you need to be using Vault Pro with life cycles. That will protect them for sure. So be it protecting against IT overreach or making sure your Vault doesn't get out of hand and making sure it's easy to manage, Vault Pro can help. So certainly we can be in touch with you about those things as well. Right, so I think I've addressed all of the questions that have come in so far, and I haven't seen anything for the last couple of minutes. So I think, Ashley, we'll go ahead and wrap up now.
Okay, well, thank you for the presentation for us, and thank you all for attending. If you do think of questions later on, you can simply